Pilate sees that they're back, and he was hoping that Herod would take care of it for him so he wouldn't have to deal with this, be bothered with this. But that causes him to be less likely to want to put Jesus to death, because he figures, and he actually says this, Herod didn't find anything wrong. He didn't find him deserving of death. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to punish him. I'm going to satisfy you. I'm going to chastise him. I'm going to have him scourged. And that's when he sends Jesus to be scourged. And he's hoping to placate their hatred toward Jesus by having Jesus scourged.
We have to be
clear.
Will be enough. That was the hardest part of the book for me to read when you describe the scourging. So Pilate is such a practical, cynical, soulless human being that even though he knows Jesus is innocent, to pacify these furious, powerful people that have come, he says, I will do what I am able to do, which is to say, I will have him scourged, which is worse than being whipped by the Jews. It's horrifying. We don't need to go into it. But he does that hoping to end it there.
He does that to save Jesus' life.
Yes.
Ironically.
Yes.
Because as bad as it was, it's better than being crucified. He didn't think Jesus, he might have thought this, well, Jesus must have annoyed them for something. Maybe he deserves to be punished for something, but he hadn't violated Roman law. Okay?
But so he's effectively saying, I can do this,
yes,
and so I will do this. So,
and
so
maybe
the
I'll
horror,
make them happy, and they'll just leave
so
it alone.
the horror of the scourging takes place.
Remember also, they accuse Jesus of being a king. When they first say he's an evildoer, and Pilate doesn't do anything, he goes out, talks to them, comes back inside the praetorium and says to Jesus, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world. So there is that idea of a treasonous charge that they concoct. They change it from blasphemy to a charge that does carry the death penalty. But Pilate does not think that Jesus is a threat. So he doesn't buy that. He realizes, because the first thing out of their minds is, he's an evildoer. Out of their mouths is evildoer, and then they concoct this idea of treason. So he's not buying it. So he has Jesus scourged.
So Jesus is scourged, and then he questions Jesus.
Okay, so he had questioned Jesus before, but he comes back out and says, I find no crime in him, but, I will go ahead and have him scourged. So he has him scourged, brings him back. And Jesus is very bloody from the scourging. And this is when Pilate says, behold the man, look at him. Isn't that enough for you? But he, rather than mollifying them, it seems to inflame them. Crucify him. This is what really, it's not enough to see him like that. This is what, he says, why? What has he done? This is what Pilate does not understand. So this is when they say, we have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God. So the people don't seem to understand the way Pilate is portrayed in the Gospels is exactly correct. Pilate was reluctant to do anything with Jesus because from the beginning, Jesus did not behave like a guilty person. He wasn't begging for his life.
You say that several times in here, and the most dramatic example of it, which again, most of us have heard, but you managed to paint the scene so beautifully that it strikes with fresh power, that Jesus has been brutalized in a way that's difficult to read, and Pilate is now questioning him, and in a sense saying hey,
your kingdom is not of this world.
What is going on here? Give me in a sense.
That's later. That's after the scourging.
That's what I'm saying. After the scourging.
So Pilate was always reluctant, but after the scourging, when they say he claims to be a God, the Son of God, now Pilate is really concerned because Jesus was not afraid of Pilate, and that was obvious. Now he goes back inside the praetorium and says, where are you from? And Jesus doesn't answer. And now Pilate gets angry, right? Don't you know that I have the power to crucify you or the power to release you? Because he's not used to people not responding to him. And then Jesus says, you have no power. unless it was given to you from above. Now Pilate really doesn't want anything to do with Jesus.
Well, but that's
It's
what's
so powerful.
I'm just saying, like, if somebody's an agnostic and they're reading this and they read your book, it's hard to conclude anything other than that there is no one in the universe like Jesus. Because if you have been brutally scourged, so horrific, and then you're talking to the man who has power over life or death, and you respond with this level of clarity and truth and fearlessness,
Yes.
that you have no to tell Pilate,
You have no power.
you have no power over
that's
me
right.
unless it has been given you from above. If I was Pilate, I would have been scared to death
He was.
of who am I talking to.
I think he absolutely was, because he was, in effect, the emperor. He comes to the province. Every provincial governor came to the province with the imperium. That means with all the power of the emperor, the power of life and death over everybody in the province, immensely powerful. And Jesus was not afraid of him. That's why I think Pilate was unnerved by Jesus' presence from the beginning. But once they say he claims to be the Son of God, then he was really afraid. And then Pilate really wants to have nothing to do with Jesus. So this is when he suggests Barabbas.
But see,
Right,
again, this is what I keep
yeah.
noticing is that the way you do it so masterfully is it's like a movie. Like the plot keeps turning and turning and turning. So now Pilate is stuck.
Right.
And he comes up with an idea. There's another way for me to get out of crucifying him.
But he never found him guilty of anything.
Right.
He didn't really have to crucify him. What he was trying to do, and this is the ironic part, he was trying to help the Jewish leaders save face, because they had brought Jesus to him. And he knew, because he worked with these people. These were on the highest level of Jewish authority in Jerusalem. And he knew that if he just released Jesus, it would be an embarrassment to them. So he's figuring, okay, how can I get out of this in a way that they can just say, well, the Romans released him, but really he's guilty. He's trying to help them. And that's why he feels stabbed in the back when they don't appreciate that.
Okay, so you have to explain.
Yes.
He's
the one who thinks
he
of
remembers.
Barabbas. Yeah.
He remembers
the prisoner release.
that you Jews
have a custom
to release a
prisoner at Passover.
At Passover.
That's right. And not necessarily that happened every year, but he knows, he's been there long enough.
But he's come up with a novel way of getting out of this horrible mess.
Shall I release for you the King of the Jews? No, not him, but Barabbas. Meanwhile, Barabbas really is a danger to Rome. That's the last person he would want released. But now he's suggested the prisoner release, and they've put him into a bind. And when they insist upon Barabbas, he says, well, what am I going to do about Jesus? But just because he has to release Barabbas because a riot was beginning, doesn't mean Jesus has to die.
Right.
That doesn't mean that Jesus has. But what about Jesus? Well, crucify him. But why? What wrong has he done? What evil has he done? He actually asks, and they insist. Right?
And this is when, and again, this is where it ends, but oh my goodness, the idea that it keeps taking these twists and turns and twists and turns, it is like a gripping legal drama. You're just on the edge of your seat, and I've never seen it presented that way, which is one of the reasons this book is so amazing, but only one. But so he's then in this situation where he's thinking, look, I do not want to crucify him. I can't really crucify him.
Yeah.
He's starting to Pilate. It's conceivable that he's thinking like, I'm playing with fire. I don't know who this man is. I'm a little frightened. And then the chief priests play the trump card.
That's
and
right.
they say...
That's right, because, well, what happened, of course, we have to, explain that the reason why he thought he might be a god is because the Greeks and the Romans had these ideas, they had these mythologies, these stories, plays. It was very much a part of their culture that sometimes the gods came down from Olympus and looked like people. And if you offended them, even just insulted them, let alone scourged them, they could come back and take revenge. You'd be sorry. So Pilate is very afraid. He thinks it's very possible that Jesus is a god. So he says they're insisting, the Jewish leaders are insisting that Jesus be crucified. They concoct this little crowd that's outside the praetorium because the temple is just yards away. And they're in charge of the temple. This is one reason why this group is not the average ordinary group, because ordinary Jews are down in the city below. They're getting ready for Passover. They have a million things to do. They're not just hanging around outside the Antonia fortress, just because. So the group there has been instructed, and one of the scriptures, one of the Gospels says that, has been instructed to shout for Barabbas and to shout for the crucifixion of Jesus. So they create the mob that shouts
and they
for his crucifixion.
But the trump card that they now play, and then this is just amazing to me.
But he says first, take him away and crucify him yourselves. I find no fault in him. And then they say what? You can take it.
I think you wrote the book. The only reason I know the answer is because I read your book last night. You say it because it's so amazing.
They say he's disgusted with them because he knows Jesus is not guilty of a Roman crime, but they keep pushing and pushing. He says, take him away and judge him. Take him away and crucify him yourself. He wasn't giving them permission to crucify him. He's just saying, I don't want anything to do with this. And they say, if you don't crucify him, you are no friend of Caesar. And
amazing.
Yes.
I mean, the levels of hypocrisy are astonishing, that as if they gave a damn about Caesar. He's their enemy.
That's right.
But they're using this.
When they say we have no king but Caesar, that's blasphemy. They have committed blasphemy.
On their terms.
On their terms, that's blasphemy.
That's I'm saying there's so much drama here that it's hard to take in, that they would say to him, then you are no friend. They're threatening him.
They're threatening him, but he knows this is, you see, when the Gospels were written, the people who wrote them, they weren't thinking, well, 2,000 years from now, somebody's going to be reading this book. They were, the people who were alive in the church at the time knew all the backstory of the things I'm telling you about. That they knew. So what did they know? And what they knew was that Tiberius Caesar was notoriously paranoid, like most of the Caesars were. They were always afraid of getting murdered. And he had put to death one of his closest advisors, a man named Sejanus, on the charge of treason. And that had happened only a few months before, maybe the year prior. And that news had come to Jerusalem. The Jewish leaders knew it. And with this, you are no friend of Caesar, Sejanus was friend of Caesar. Okay, that's a title of like a person who was given special privileges and honors by Caesar. So Sejanus, who was friend of Caesar, a very close advisor of Tiberius Caesar, was put to death by Tiberius. And a lot of people who were part of his circle. So by saying to Pilate, you are no friend of Caesar, they were saying, if you don't kill Jesus, we will tell Tiberius that we brought a man to you who we told you claimed to be a king, that's treason, and you didn't do anything about it. So maybe you won't kill him today, but we're going to tell Tiberius, you're going to be recalled to Rome, and he'll take care of you there. So this is why immediately after they say this, he ascends the judgment seat to sentence Jesus to death, because he knows it's going to be Jesus or himself. Maybe he would save Jesus, but eventually they would make sure, because they were so determined to put Jesus to death, they would have sent a delegation to Rome, they would have reported to Tiberius, they would have gotten rid of Pilate that way. And then with the next guy, they would have made sure that Jesus was put to death by crucifixion.
This is so fascinating. Have you ever thought of putting this in a book?